All right, you've almost made it to the end of this week. I know this one's probably been hard. It's a lot of videos. It's a lot of listening here, but these topics are really interesting. So maybe that's kept you um, kind of kept your interest in this at least. And I hope that you've been challenged a little bit to think about these things more deeply. But we'll close this week out with a discussion on biotechnology and how that relates to Christian ethics. And this one is kind of loosely connected to ethical issues at the beginning of life. The last two are obviously with abortion and reproductive technology. That's necessarily the beginning of life. This one is also directed at the beginning of life, but also can fall outside of that as well. But it's still associated, so it falls under this week of discussion. So let's talk a little bit about biotechnology, and I hope that somebody recognizes this image on the right. When we had this class on campus last semester, I think we had a really small class because it was a 7:30 a.m. class every Tuesday and Thursday morning. You talk about something fun is having two little kids at home under the age of 2, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays trying to get everybody out the door. That's a lot of fun. But anyway, this isn't about me. I love my kids, I love my job, and I love getting to teach this class. So I probably shouldn't be grumbling. But I hope you recognize what that image is. In that class, we had something like, I think it was 15, 16 students, and 2 of them raised their hands and said they knew who that little guy was on the right. But both of them thought it came from Schoolhouse Rock. That does not come from Schoolhouse Rock. If you don't know what that comes from, that'll be your homework. That's one of the best movies of all time, at least in my opinion, but not super relevant. But I was trying to think of a picture to put in the PowerPoint, and that's all I could get. So the Human Genome Project, let's talk a little bit about that. By 2001, scientists could essentially map out the entire human genetic code. And since then, or they figured out how to do it. Genetic info since then has just absolutely exploded. So since 2001, we've learned so much about the human genome and diseases and all kinds of things. But to begin with, there's really 2 different things that the Human Genome Project has done. It's revealed to us direct causal links. That'll show us what genes identify whether or not a person will develop diseases like Down syndrome, sickle cell anemia, and cystic fibrosis, among others. But not only will it show you like a direct causal link, it'll also reveal dispositions. So genes can also reveal just a general disposition for certain types of cancers or heart disease or diabetes. So you can tell already this is really valuable. I mean, we can already we can know, parents can get tested before they have their children. They can test the embryo, they can test the baby, they can test the fetus for direct causal links or predispositions. And a lot of times at-risk mothers, depending on their background of family history, doctors will actually recommend that they get some genetic testing done to figure out if their child is going to be at risk or not, or if their child will be born with some type of disease or some type of issue. So that leads us here. So genetic testing, I kind of just said exactly what I was supposed to say for here. But parents can get genetic testing to help them prepare for the difficulty of raising a child with abnormalities. And again, I really hope this doesn't sound really insensitive. Abnormalities simply here, not to be a negative connotation, but just to say something outside of, I guess, the average level of health of a child who's born. So when we say abnormality, we certainly don't mean that a child is abnormal or grotesque or less than human. So maybe abnormal. I think I just pulled this straight from the book. Yeah, let's just blame it on Ray and not on me. But yeah, I should probably use some more careful wording here, so I'm sorry about that. But still, it's good for parents to be prepared if their child is going to have special kinds of needs. So that's probably a better term to use here. Raising a child with some special types of needs. It's critical. I think it will help parents to have some time to adjust if they want it. If they don't, that's fine. But it could, I mean, for some people, certainly we might say that's good. That testing can be good. And you might think, well, what on earth, what ethical issues can we have with genetic testing? Well, sometimes when those results don't come back with a favorable outcome, parents make a decision to end the pregnancy. And what's very sad is, since it's become easier to get this type of testing, the number of babies with special needs has gone down. Now, is that because we've been able to intervene with the genetic code and solve some of these problems? Well, we've been able in some cases, but sadly, the data, at least as Scott Ray presents it in the book, the data shows that there's a lot of parents out there who have made the decision to end the pregnancy if the child is going to have special needs. So they're willing to keep the child if it doesn't have special needs, but if it does, pushes them in the direction of, well, maybe it's not worth, maybe this quality of life is not worth living. If the child's going to have this particular quality of life, maybe it's not worth living. And as we talked about personhood earlier, I think even the most pro-choice among us would say, well, you can't, if a person is a human, you can't just end their life because they have special needs, or because they're not at a normal level of health. Like, somebody's health doesn't determine their personhood. It's very sad stuff. Maybe you can see now why I've got this little kind of goofy image here to kind of maybe lighten things up a little bit. But seriously, these things are kind of hard to swallow here. That fact is it's kind of difficult, but that's where we are. So there's genetic testing, sometimes good and sometimes maybe not so ethical. Gender selection is another issue of not an issue of biotechnology, but I guess another aspect, or another biotechnology itself. I'm running out of words. It's what happens when you record all these videos at once and you talk for forever. So in vitro fertilization, it's the same thing we talked about earlier, but now the doctors only implant the selected gender. So we said earlier they only implant probably 1 to 3 or maybe just 1. But here you can select what gender you want. So if you always wanted a little boy, or if you've always wanted a little girl, you can go to in vitro fertilization and just pick the boys and girls, or pick one of the boys or one of the girls. But the bad news here from the Christian ethical side is obviously that the other embryos are usually discarded or used for medical research. And we've already discussed what it means to be used for medical research. They're usually dismembered and sold to different companies that are doing different types of research. There's some sperm separating tech out now. They claim it's called microsort. They advertise an 85 to 90% success rate, usually done for family balancing. But this is gender selection. Like, you can pick. You just go tell them, hey, we want to have a boy. And they'll take your cells and they will tell you, okay, we're going to give you this type of child. Interesting fact here: males are more popular in developing countries, and females are more popular in Europe and the United States. I don't know what reasons might be behind that, but I just thought Ray brings that up in the book. And when we talked about population control earlier, it's just interesting. To me, not sure what's behind it. There's a few issues here that we got to look at after we get through intervention and editing. And somehow these made it on the slides, but not in my notes. That's a first. It's usually the other way around. But intervention and editing. Scientists can now actually remove defective genes and splice healthy ones into the early stages of embryonic growth and even sex cells. So they can do some amazing things to maybe alleviate certain types of health problems in embryos. Certainly, they haven't eliminated all of the problems, and as we talked about earlier, those the number of babies with special needs going down. We could try to make, from optimistically, could try to assume it's because of this. But if you read Ray's book, if you read the chapter, it'll tell you something a little bit different. But there's little debate about using these technologies to prevent diseases, right? I mean, if we have the ability to heal a disease, whether it's through medicine or genetic alteration, I doubt there's many of us that are going to plant our heels or plant our feet down and say, well, we can't do that. We cannot use, this is unnatural. We cannot heal these diseases through unnatural means. Some people might argue that. They might have some pretty good reasons behind it, but I think a lot of us probably would say, well, what's the difference in this and certain types of medication that literally, they don't literally change your DNA, but that help your immune system. It's not natural; it's artificial. So, what's the problem with this type of artificial alteration? So, I think when we're talking about preventing diseases, we're not going to argue a lot about it. This, though, is depending on your outlook. This is either really cool or pretty terrifying. Gene splicing technology right now is in the early stages of making designer children available to parents. So the DNA of an embryo can be altered to enhance normal traits, but this is not ready for public use yet. I don't know if the super rich people are able to do this right now, or if it's just the technology is not ready, or if it's too expensive. But because again, this is not my background. I'm in over my head here trying to talk about changing someone's DNA. I'm not a geneticist or a genetic engineer. I don't even know what the right term is. So you know that's not my background. But either way, it's not ready just for anybody to go and do it right now. And so the idea is that parents, if they want their kids to be genetically disposed to be taller, they can. Or if they want them to be smarter, they can go into the code. They can go into the genetic coding to try to make their kid tall, athletic, smarter, funnier, whatever, like blue eyes, blonde hair, long hair. I mean, well, probably not long hair, short hair, but you get the idea. You get the picture. This one, though, you might have a few more ethical concerns about making a designer child than you do preventing diseases. Because at this point, maybe we're not acting in the best interest of the child. We're acting in the best interest of just the inclination of the parents. And you might, in our class on campus, we had a really good discussion about this one because we had several students say, well, isn't if I try to code my son to be athletic so he can get a scholarship in college, isn't that like I'm still acting in his best interest, right? So it's just like healing a disease. Maybe I'm doing it for him. It's not just me wanting to live my life through my child. It's me wanting my child to have a good life and maybe even a better life than I had. Well, I think there's some ethical concerns we need to ask, or questions we need to ask here from Scripture or from things we learn in Scripture. First question I think we have to ask is, are we now playing God when we start designing people? Because you remember earlier, we talked about God's role in creating the person in the womb. Well, just how far can we go to alter that genetic code without playing God and undercutting God's sovereignty? Whether we're undercutting it by playing God ourselves or whether we're undercutting it by undermining our trust in God. So if I'm a Christian parent am I kind of, am I, is it me showing a lack of faith in God to say, I feel like the only way I can set my child up for success is to code them to be this particular way? We probably have a lot of different opinions on that in the class. This is where it really hurts us being online. So on the discussion board, if somebody wants to take this topic and run with it, that'd be awesome. That'd probably get us some really good discussion. But does it undermine trust in God's sovereignty? And the last question that we have to ask, do parents have the right to force their code on their unborn children? We got some typos going here, so sorry about that. Do parents have the right to force their own genetic code onto their unborn kids? What does this do to the free will of children? Let's put it this way. Imagine you're a teenager. And for some of us, that might have been a difficult part of life, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But let's say you find out that your parents had coded you to be a certain, like they had gone to the doctor and they had you coded, or I don't want to say programmed, but it's really the same thing. So they have you programmed to be a certain way. How's that going to make you feel? Like, whereas your parents were allowed to be, I guess you could say they're allowed to be themselves in the fullest sense of the term. Your parents, because teenagers feel like their parents are controlling already, don't they? Like, we as teenagers, by and large, teenagers feel like their parents are telling them what to do too often. Like, you're not letting me live my life. I'm having to live my life by your rules. I don't live by my rules, and blah, 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 blah. Whatever it might be, the things I'm waiting for my kids to tell me in about 10 or 11 years. And let's hope those 10 or 11 years go very slowly. What does that do to the child's free will, though, if you just trying to put yourselves in the shoes of a teenager, thinking not only do my parents try to control me through all these external factors of how I dress, where I go to school, what I eat, maybe who I'm spending my time with on the weekends and after school. And now you find out, well, my parents aren't just trying to control me through external factors. They altered my DNA. Like, they changed my genetic. They wouldn't just let me be me to begin with. They changed my genetic code. They didn't want, like, just normal original me wouldn't have been good enough. Like, they wanted me but taller. They wanted me but more athletic. They wanted me but better grades on tests. They wanted me but blonde hair instead of brown hair. Or they wanted me but, you could, I try to imagine, I guess, here, just for the sake of argument, how might you feel if you decided, or if you found out that your parents coded you to be a certain way? Does that rob you of your free will? You might say, well, if my parents coded me to have brown hair, black hair, I can just dye my hair. I've still got well, you can't really do anything about your height, can you? Maybe you could do something about maybe you're athletic, but you just don't want to play sports, or you're smart, but you don't really care that much about education. I guess you still have free will, and your parents gave you a higher capacity to give you more success. You could argue that, but just wonder how, you'd feel if you found out that your parents had coded you to be a certain way. It's interesting that even God gives people free will to make their own decisions, right? And you might say, well, God doesn't allow us to choose if we're going to be tall or short or this, that, or the other. Well, no. In that respect, we don't have the free will to be, we don't have the free will to necessarily change our biology. But later in the semester, we'll find out that a lot of people do think we have the free will to change our biology. But to begin with, we need to ask these 3 questions about biotechnology. Are we playing God when we're altering somebody's genetic code? Are we showing a lack of trust in God when we're literally trying to code somebody to either solve a problem they're having or to just make them more prone to success? And are parents forcing their own ideas and their own things on their unborn children if they go alter their DNA to be a certain way? These are all very relevant questions that I think we need to ask before we have a balanced ethical decision here at the end of that ladder. But this is going to do it for ethical issues at the beginning of life. I hope we didn't bore you to death with these videos, but a lot of this is very important and really meaningful. So I hope you didn't. I don't think there's, other than just having to listen to me talk, I think the content is great. Now, I might not be presenting it the best way. You might be sick of hearing me talk by now, but at least the content is good. I look forward to reading your discussion boards. And if you've got any questions about anything going on in the course, feel free to let me know. But this is where we'll stop, and I'll see you guys next week.